Beyond the gate, spoilers tease that Dani causes Bill to bristle with a cocktail of disappointment and envy when she mentions the trip she and Andre have planned. It is the kind of tease that lands softly at first, a casual remark about a weekend away, and then settles like a stone in the middle of a room where people have been avoiding certain truths. In that moment you can see the small, human fractures, Bill's jaw tightening, his eyes tracing the syllables of a name that once meant something uncomplicated, Andre's silence turning into a slow, dangerous form of attention. The scene that follows is less about luggage or plane tickets and more about old loyalties and the new, fragile faith Andre is building in Dani. He watches her across a table as if weighing the distance between what he has and what the past might still hold for her. When the camera or the imagination lingers on Andre's face, you feel the way jealousy sometimes disguises itself as practicality. He pulls Dani away to his apartment, not in a grand, possessive gesture, but in a private, urgent attempt to reclaim proximity. The move says more about fear than possession. It says he needs to be certain that the woman he's beginning to build his life around is choosing him for the right reasons and not out of habit or obligation. They argue in low, clipped sentences at first, then softer as old wounds are approached without anesthesia. Dani wraps her words in the economy of someone who has grown used to smoothing things over. She'd been with Bill, she says, because there are still threads of their shared life to tie up: custody arrangements, school records, a loose-ended promise about seeing their daughters more. Bill, who has been absent and regret-checked, sits in the space between them in imagination. A figure who once loved Dani enough to make a life and then, in a set of missteps and misjudgments, allowed the life to slip into an uneasy arrangement of texts and rare dinners. Andre listens, his hands balling and unballing on the edge of the couch that has starting to become their couch, his mind cataloging every word for a way to insulate himself from future surprises. Dani tells him plainly there's nothing beyond what she said. No secret reunions, no rekindling. The words are intended as a bandage for the burn of suspicion. They are honest, and they are also a promise she knows she must keep. That promise becomes a hinge for what comes next. They begin to plan a trip together. A deliberate act of reclaiming leisure and normalcy after months of cautious dating. Dani gives Andre the choice of two destinations, an intentionally fair gesture that reveals a lot about who she is, not one to dominate, not one to be dominated. She chooses Las Vegas, and the decision has a small, private excitement to it: the electric frivolity of neon, the improbability of two people who have spent their adult lives negotiating responsibilities and resentments, choosing, for once, an island of indulgence. Vegas beckons as a place where rules are softer and time can be bought by the hour. For Dani it is a tiny rebellion, a permission slip to be wide-eyed and a little reckless. For Andre it is a test of the seriousness he has been cultivating toward their relationship. He smiles at the choice in a way that marks his commitment. There's a lightness to his agreement, yes, but also a gravity. He decides, in that intimate victory, to date Dani seriously. The planning is small and domestic and therefore intimate. He helps her choose a flight time that won't conflict with school pickups. He insists on sitting with her while she packs because every bag she tucks away is another small catalog of her life. They move through lists the way people who are building something do: dates, times, sunglasses, chargers, a tiny bottle of perfume Dani swears by. There are moments when the past intrudes, every now and then, like a song on the radio that one of them knows the words to and the other does not. Bill's name appears in a text as he finished filling out the school forms, and the conversation is perfunctory, polite. They're co-parenting a series of small administrative handshakes. But there's a thrum under all of it. The kind of nervous energy that precedes a big choice. They both know travel is a crucible. It is a way to compress time and see how two people behave when they are forced to be themselves for longer than a weekday dinner or a television episode allows. Maybe that's why the flight booking felt like a ceremony, a public announcement of private intentions. On the morning of the flight, the world seems ordinary in the way everything does when you're about to step into a change. They drive through half-light and the city's pulse is waking up, a soft blur of street lamps and last-minute coffee. Andre drives them to the airport, the silence punctuated by the radio and the occasional breath of conversation. Danny sits beside him with an odd combination of restlessness and calm. There's a list of things she wants to do in Vegas, a show she once promised herself she'd see, the chance to gamble for the first time since the divorce, perhaps the pleasure of being seen with a man who looks at her with a steady gaze. The plane is a small, humming thing at the gate, indifferent and enormous. The terminal, a place where lives fold into one another for a few hours before they unfold somewhere else. The moment of crisis is sudden in its mechanics and slow in its human consequences. An unnoticed vibration, a stutter in the heartbeat of the plane, becomes an alarmed chorus of lights and dispatches. The flight attendants move with trained calm, their smiles thinning into practiced concern. A nod smell, the metallic tang of something overheating wafts through the cabin. Andre reaches a hand to hold Danny's across the armrest and finds that their fingers know each other's map by now, the firmness of her grip, the quick pulse at the base of her thumb, the small reassurance that both are present. The plane buckles in turbulence at first, then something more is announced by a low, worrying sound through the fuselage. The captain's voice, always a calm rope in the air, comes through clipped and unusually concise. "We're experiencing a mechanical issue. Please remain seated and prepare for possible emergency procedures." The words are formal, their effect is not. Then everything accelerates. Oxygen masks drift out like a rain of anonymous faces, the emergency lights etching the aisles into a chiaroscuro of urgency. Someone behind them screams, a child starts to cry in a sharp, high bubble of sound that makes everyone scan for a reason to be calm. Andre turns to Danny and finds her eyes wide open, a slate of calm that frightens him more than the chaos does. She does not panic, not because she is composed but because she has a practiced acceptance for certain kinds of danger. The sort earned by people who have learned to hold when much of life has required them to. That stoicism is part of what Andre finds intoxicating and also, in this moment, maddeningly inadequate. He presses his forehead to hers as instructed in the safety card, not because it will help but because he is a man trying to anchor something he fears losing. The plane lurches, the world tilts, and then the sequence they had all been taught: brace, hold, weight becomes an impossible logic against metal and velocity. What follows is a blur of trained responses and human failure. The plane does not simply fall, it negotiates its descent like a beast in pain, tilting and producing sounds that have no name. There is an impact that is less a singular event than a cascade, a ripping, a compression, the sudden collapse of an aisle. Seat belts snap like the small, ordinary bones of a life being broken. And then the fuel of sound leaves the cabin in a violent exhalation. People cry, people murmur prayers, and through this fog a stewardess shouts instructions with the ferocity of someone who is the last line between order and sheer chaos. The overhead bins disgorge their contents, rain of unfamiliar objects on strangers. The engine groans and then, mercifully and horrifyingly at once, the sounds that matter: the banging of first responders, the wail of sirens, the dull thud of someone being hauled free begin to arrive. Andre feels the weight of the plane's metal like a living thing pressing down on the side where the closest exit should have been. He tastes smoke and adrenaline, and then a new, terrible realization: the exit ahead is jammed. The corridor is a canyon of bodies, and there is a life and death negotiation between the living and the immobile. He pulls at Danny's arm and finds it trapped beneath a tangle of debris: a luggage cart, a seat, the contorted remains of a tray table. For a breath he imagines pulling her free and running into an indifferent world, but the plane resists. The structure creaks and refuses to give. Around them, other passengers grope toward light like animals seeking a cliff to scale. Some have blood on their faces, a sheen of life and trauma. Someone older beside them has a wound that is bleeding heavily but is bafflingly calm. The effect of losing control is not universal. A mother, her hair appended to one side by the force of the impact, cradles a child who leans like a sapling against her chest, eyes half-closed. The scene is a mosaic of ordinary people arranged by accident into a tableau of mortal contingency. Outside, the noise of responders is a growing presence. The plane sits on an emergency strip, a place of rescue, but rescue is a process. and processes take time. The first responders arrive with the measured energy of people whose job has a certain trained cruelty. They must be quick and efficient and not allow themselves to be devastated by the human cost. They start cutting, prying panels, using hydraulic tools that hiss with power. The cabin, where minutes feel like years, is heated with the smell of burnt fiber and the sharp, clinical scent of antiseptic attempts at order. A bright headlamp shines into Danny's face, the sudden light like an interrogation. She squeezes Andre's hand with a strength that belies the pain. He feels small, unskilled in the first arts of rescue. He can only be there, press his cheek to hers, whispering half-coherent promises that are at once confession and bargaining. In the hospital later, because the story moves its pieces like chess to the place where trauma is catalogued and treated, the emergency room takes on a perverse sanctity. It is a room where language becomes thin and technical, where the human names are being counted and sorted, and everyone else's story is reduced into medical shorthand. Andre is asked to wait in a corridor with others whose loved ones are still being extricated from the wreckage. He sits in a chair that is too small for his anxiety and watches the staff come and go, their faces a map of busy competence. Someone, a nurse or an airline representative, approaches him with the soft, rehearsed words that people say to ease those on the precipice of bad news. "We are doing everything we can." Each phrase lands on him like an oar, trying to move him through a churning sea. He tries to remember each small detail of the crash he could use to reconstruct Danny in his mind, how she laughed when he had offered to pay for the extra legroom, how she had tucked a paperback novel into her bag, how she had, absurdly, insisted on bringing 2 pairs of earrings because she couldn't decide which to wear. Meanwhile, back in the family orbit, the ripple of the accident reaches out like a stone dropped in a pond. Anita gets the call in the small hours, or perhaps it is a knock, an unexpected presence at her door. The news is the kind that tilts a life. It offers no details at first, only a tremulous possibility: a flight had trouble, people injured. Anita hears Danny's name through the fuzz of a voice, or perhaps a neighbor runs in with a phone in hand. She is not prepared. Anita is a woman who has, in the half-life of caring for others, become hardened against small surprises but not against catastrophic ones. The Dupree family is thrown into motion. Vernon, who might be a brother, an uncle, a man with quiet authority, directs what can be directed. He calls numbers that come and logistics that matter: the airline, the hospital, the school. The name Dupree becomes shorthand for a family trying to arrange its grief into something actionable. Anita's hands are practical. She is the kind of woman who will call the airline, demand a name, demand a flight manifest. She will arrange rides, check on the girls, call Bill with a voice that cracks only on the edge of the vowel and then steadies. There is no drama in her movements. She simply organizes. She moves through the necessary filters of bureaucracy like a surgeon through a list of priorities. Yet under that competence there is a human collapse that she cannot hide, the fear that hot fingers of grief can sometimes wrap around the heart like a clamp. Dupree and Vernon, who may be connected to the family by marriage or history, appear like logistical supports, their established roles in family lore now activated in service of an emergency the way old machines are wheeled out for necessary tasks. They liaise with the airline, insist on updates, make sure someone is at the hospital who can identify belongings, arrange for the girls' care. The family becomes a temporary command center, a place where resilience is not rhetorical but operational. In these moments, Bill's regret becomes a palpable weight. There is a sequence of memory that lifts up in him: a late dinner at a kitchen table where the children's drawings had been taped like little flags to the refrigerator, a missed recital that he filled with a cheap excuse, holidays where work took precedence over presents. He remembers the day he left in specifics that are now both excruciating and tender: the exact shirt Danny had been wearing, the way one of their daughters had tucked her hair behind an ear when she asked him to stay, his answer a promise slick with poor timing. Now, in the hospital's waiting area, those missed moments rearrange themselves into a line of blame where he stands accused and acquitted by the same breath. He has not been the upright kind of man he wants to be. Bureaucracy, petty compromises, and a kind of moral flexibility have kept him away. He is, in his quiet core, an imperfect person who has learned to justify small evasions by calling them survival. The name Jacob, the man he has disliked for reasons he understands too well, appears now as a figure who exposed him, who poked at his private affairs and smelled wrongdoing like a hound. Bill bristles at the memory of Jacob's investigations into certain shady dealings in the city. Dealings Bill has been tangentially aware of. He has always been uneasy with Jacob's follower of truth character, perceiving it as moral arrogance toward people whose mistakes were, in his mind, private. Jacob's unpopularity in Bill's estimation was not only political, it was personal. There was a longer conversation, perhaps one of the last real conversations Danny had with Bill before the trip, that haunts him now. They had sat across from each other under the lukewarm light of a diner after a school meeting, a place neutral enough for truth to be said and cushioned enough for it to be forgiven. Bill admitted, haltingly, the regret he carried for the things he had missed with their daughters. How work had stolen him slowly and steadily. Danny listened the way someone who has learned to carry burdens listens, with a tempered compassion that could be mistaken for coolness. She urged him, in a voice that was both sharp and generous, to find out about Madsen, someone or something that had become a cipher in their lives. Perhaps Madsen was a figure who could provide closure, a witness to some aspect of their past, or a person whose history intersected with Jacob's investigations. Danny, ever the mediator, encouraged Bill to engage because she believed in not allowing fear to calcify into resentment. She reminded him, with the firmness of someone who has made peace with certain complications, that Jacob's work was not about attacking Bill personally but about scraping at the rot that could get under anyone's house if left unchecked. Bill, defensive and imperfectly upright, had always bristled at Jacob for making him uncomfortable. That discomfort is now a mirror he cannot avoid. Back at the hospital crash site, the scene divides into two kinds of narrative, the clinical and the personal. Clinicians move with diagnostic language that turns people into charts. Family members move with a moral urgency that is less tidy and far more human. Danny's body is treated like something precious and fragile. Doctors perform scans, each image a crossword puzzle of damage and hope. She is one of the injured, not the only one, but one whose presence is central to many people. Her injuries are described in the technical telescopes of medicine, of course a blunt force trauma here, a laceration repaired there, but what the instruments miss is the private geography of Danny's life, the small rituals that made her human outside of those fractures. Nurses murmur about her like sisters. Andre sits in the corner, hands folded, feeling like an interloper in the one story he was meant to enter. He draws from memory, the small, domestic recollections, the way she pressed her lips to his cheek after booking the tickets, the way she had snorted when he suggested matching socks. These tiny facts are powerful now because they are the last clean images he has. There is, too, a cinematic moment of recollection in Danny's head, perhaps splinters of light. Perhaps a sequence where memory folds back on itself. She thinks of a conversation with Bill about their daughters, watching him confess regret about the life he had missed. In that memory, Bill speaks like a man trying to exorcise the small, private ghosts of absentee fatherhood. Danny, for her part, articulates a strange and difficult support. She encourages him to know Madsen and to pursue the truth in a way that is not punitive but restorative. She is the one to remind him that people are complicated and that hatred can be the shallow end of empathy. Her words are steady and final in the moment, almost as if she had always known she would have to plant them as anchors. The emergency room's bright lights render everything stark and final. Monitors beep in time with the waiting hearts of those who watch. Andre reaches out and touches the cold, plastic casing of a machine the way someone might touch a relic from a deceased relative, with a mixture of reverence and a desperate hope to be absolved by ritual. Anita circulates like a general, her mission to assemble the bits of a life into something salvageable. Vernon bargains quietly with airline officials, pushing for lists and cargo manifests and guarantees. Bill sits somewhere in between, a man learning how to swallow guilt with small, efficient sips. He reads the same old scripture in his head: the mistakes of the past are not undone by catastrophe. But catastrophe can make repentance honest. The hospital becomes a theater of these private philosophies. Then there's a particular scene that might be among the last lucid things Dani experiences before the world closes in with its urgent soft hands. She feels, in lucid flashes, the exact weight of Bill's apology. It's not a dramatic parole but a small, sincere confession. He's sorry for missing birthdays, for filling in with presents instead of presents, for thinking his choices were small when they mattered. She forgives him in a way that doesn't clean the slate so much as annotate it with clarity. Her parting words, the ones she gives before she is taken into surgical rooms and sedatives, include a strange, resolute kindness. She encourages Bill to look for Jacob, not to punish but to understand, to see that calling out wrongdoing can be a way to stop it from happening to others. This is the Dani that haunts the woman who refuses to let anger calcify into vengeance, who believes in the slow, bruising work of truth. She offers this counsel with the calm that makes Bill's eyes wet with the small saline of sudden contrition. In the immediate aftermath, the film or the story as it is retold in rooms and whispered in hospital corridors becomes less about the mechanics of a crash and more about the interior arithmetic of loss. People count up years of what-ifs like beads on a string, measuring how they might have acted differently. They give each other advice and then immediately regret it. Call the girls, someone says, and then they all realize they have already done that. The call that lands and lands again and lands in the same place. Empty. Anita stands with a headset of authority and collapses into a chair the moment a nurse opens the door and says nothing more than a small, clinical phrase. She's stable but critical. The words are both a mercy and a terror. Stable but critical is the exact geometry of modern hope, a precise grid that does not explain how someone feels to watch a life suspended. As the hours stretch like a film reel being slowed by grief, the question that haunts is simple and monstrous: will she wake? The scene cuts to a monitor's quiet beep, the soft hiss of oxygen, the anonymous whir of a ventilator. Andre sits, eyes hollow from sleep, his hand still pressed to a sheet that smells faintly of hospital disinfectant and the faint perfume of Dani. Bill, an imperfect man in the soft light, reads a scrap of his life backward and forwards, searching for the moment where things might have been otherwise. Anita studies the family in a way that is almost a practical prayer, calling attorneys, calling flight logs, calling friends who can be asked to watch the girls grow up if the worst happens. Vernon's face contracts into a map of decisions one has to make before one wants to. Even here, with the machines humming and the nurses keeping a business-like watch, there is room for tenderness in the way they touch Dani, a hand on the forehead from Bill, a whisper from Andre that might be a promise or might be an invocation. She breathes through the tubes in a rhythm that is both mechanical and strangely intimate, an involuntary trust in strangers to keep her body from dissolving. In this strange vigil, there is a question of moral inventory. What do they owe her now? In the hush between machines and the roar of all they had been, the film teases that these might be some of Dani's last frames, a possible end for a woman who had been stubborn about living with dignity and laughter. The camera or the mind's eye holds on her face, the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth, the slack of exhaustion. It lingers in the ethical fog of a life suspended. Might the next time we see her she will be the same? Might she not come back at all? The question is unbearable and unsated. And so the story pauses on a threshold, an emergency room filled with the throb of life-saving machines, a family rearranging itself on the pivot of fear, a boyfriend becoming something more solemn under the strain, an ex-husband learning how to say sorry in ways he had not known before. The narrative pulls back and leaves them there, in the raw aftermath, with the monitor's steady beep as the only promise that time, at least, is continuing. It is an ending that refuses to be an ending, a liminal space where hope and dread cage each other and where every small human decision, a phone call, a visit, a whispered apology, is suddenly stamped with consequence. The plane's wreckage becomes a crucible, the hospital its chapel, and the lives it touched are left teetering on the edge of an answer that only time and a fragile human body can give. The emergency wing's hum is a kind of chorus for the second day, a rhythm that converts fear into acts and acts into news. The hospital staff move like clock hands, purposeful and indifferent, while the family stitches themselves into a new arrangement of roles. Bill, having been granted the mechanical kindness of reflection, begins to talk in more concrete terms about the past. He confesses, not in a melodramatic rush but in a slow, halting trickle, about a specific set of decisions he made that led him away from home more than he should have. He remembers the nights that were traded for opportunities, the immediate returns over the slow yields of fatherhood. These confessions are not all-consuming at first. They come in the language of people trying to build a penitent bridge to a future they hope to be allowed to cross. He speaks of Jacob again, this time not with indignation but with a weary apology. He had avoided the kind of scrutiny Jacob represented because the scrutiny was precise and exposed him. Bill's moral flexibility had felt adaptive in a world of difficult choices. Now it feels like cowardice. Andre, who has been sitting in the corner of the hospital room with the fatigue of the newly devoted, begins to show a different shade of himself. He is worried in a way that is intimate and immovable, the kind of worry that becomes a kind of possession. He recounts to Anita small memories that are acts of hope, Danny's insistence upon small joys, the way she kept socks mended, the way she made the girls mix songs into playlists as if music itself could stitch their family together. He tells these stories with a tenderness that is almost docile, as if by telling them out loud he can anchor them into the air and keep them from being wiped away. His language is simple, and that simplicity is its own courage. He is not yet a man versed in the rhetoric of public grief, but his private advertisements of devotion, the way he says Danny's name as if calling a bird back from a wire, are enough for those who hear him. The news cycles through the hospital wings in the way rubble dislodges from a cliff. There is an official statement from the airline, a cautious summary in which liability and sympathy are constrained by legal diction. There are investigators who arrive in sober suits, asking precise, methodical questions that imply their work is to establish what happened rather than to wrap it in narrative. They know how to dissect events without being swallowed by them. Their presence does not calm so much as formalize. The crash becomes an object of scrutiny rather than merely an event. The families, for their part, are drawn into a choreography with the airline representatives and the investigators. Anita negotiates with a cool practicality that disarms the most officious clerks. She insists on lists, on seat charts, on passenger manifests, on names that could never be just numbers to her. Vernon coordinates the family's logistics, travel for relatives, a schedule of visits, someone to be with the girls at home. The Dupree family becomes a human relay system for raw information. As the hours yield to a bleak new day, Danny's condition rides a sort of clinical roller coaster. Tests show swelling that is being managed, bleeding that has been staunched, but the brain, the most unpredictable of organs, resists both prognosis and plain hope. The surgeons, with the calm of people who must carry certainty like a practiced lie, speak of caution. They are candid. Recovery will be a series of small gains if it comes at all. They talk in percentages and in ranges, the words oddly insignificant next to the bodies in beds. The hospital bed becomes a kind of suspended cathedral, where people come to talk to Danny as if to an altar. Her daughters, if they can be brought, will say the things kids say, half understanding, half mimicry. Their presence in the waiting area is a quiet that rattles, different from the adult chatter. Their smallness is its own kind of indictment, asking the adults around them to explain gravity without the tools to do so. In the pauses between professional updates and family strategizing, there are moments of raw human exchange that might be the most honest part of the whole ordeal. Bill and Andre, who started out as a triangle of conflicting affections, now find themselves in a strange solidarity. They sit across from each other in a burst of weary truce. The space between them is composed of history and potential. Bill, who has been given a second chance to make sense of what he has allowed to lapse, watches Andre with something like respect. He sees the man who loved his former wife in ways that are complicated: earnestness, not showmanship; faithfulness, not ownership. There is a brief, tentative conversation about fatherhood, about how presence is a daily, tiny practice rather than an occasional grand ritual. They don't solve anything, but they recognize in each other the same animal fallibility. Meanwhile, Anita organizes tributes of the simplest sorts. She arranges a rota of people who would sit with Danny's body in the recovery room, a human guard of people ready to hold her hand, feed her water, press a tissue to a face. She is firm in her belief that to be present matters. Vernon does what he knows best. He makes arrangements with lawyers and insurance agents, a series of practicalities that are a strange kind of holy work. The family begins to imagine the many permutations of grief and to plan for contingencies with a nervous thoroughness. In these rituals, those left on the outside feel like they can do something real while the body fights its own battle in silence. There is a scene in which Danny, in a moment perhaps produced by medication and memory, reaches out. Not physically, the damage to her limbs or the sedation might prevent that simple action, but through a gesture, a pressure against the sheet that someone at her bedside interprets as a sign she is still listening. Andre leans forward, tears silently staining his face, and whispers a mundane promise. They will go to Vegas, he will hold her hand the whole time, he will ask her daughters to let him be a part of their lives in whatever way they allow. He speaks as if repetition itself could anchor his words in the air and force them into reality. Bill listens and then speaks, offering a kinder, differently humored promise. He will try to be more present, to learn without lordship, to be a man who attends. It is an exchange that is less about legal forms than about the daily art of being less selfish. There is also the slow, legalistic coldness of investigations. Jacob, the man Bill has long maligned, appears not as a villain in the story but as a professional who asks questions. He shows up at the airport with a clipboard and an appetite for facts. The scene with Jacob is awkward. Bill's posture tightens as if old resentments are names scratched into his skin. But Jacob is not there for Bill, he is there for the crash. He interviews passengers, collects statements, and lifts facts from the air like a doctor lifting a fever chart. His presence complicates the moral calculus for Bill. He had always thought of Jacob as a prosecutorial smile and a moralist who enjoyed the exposure of others. Now Bill sees a man whose work, repeated and relentless, exists to make sure that tragedies are accounted for so that they might not be repeated. As the second day slides toward an exhausted dusk, the hospital becomes a theater of waiting. People read, pace, make tea, stare at the television that mutters the news of the day. There are occasional flashes as reporters call the hospital, their voices earnest and intrusive. The family sets ground rules: only certain spokespeople will talk, and only after they've had time to compose something honest. The rest of the world can watch as the story distills into headlines and hashtags, but the people who know the passengers know that headlines are thin skins that bruise easily. At night, when the lights are low and the monitors glow like small, unwavering constellations, the narrative once again collapses into the interior. Danny's life is a series of small beauties catalogued by those who love her. The way she organized school folders with clinical efficiency, the way she used to hum when washing dishes, the soft authority with which she corrected her girls' math homework. Each memory is a kind of currency, traded for the hope that memory can be converted into presence somehow. There are also moments of bitter truth, that love alone does not negotiate every cruelty of chance. Being loved does not inoculate you against the randomness of fate. It does not promise survival. Yet hope persists, not as a theological certainty but as a stubborn human resource. Andre continues to pull from it, sitting by Danny's bed and reading passages of a novel they had both loved. He reads badly with a voice that catches on consonants, but the cadence of his readings anchors the room. Bill sits and writes a small list of things he intends to do if Danny wakes: take her to the park, show up at every recital, ask her daughters what they need from him. It is an inventory of repair that is both naive and gravity-laden. Anita watches both men with the kind of pragmatic tenderness only someone who has had to fix small disasters can muster. She arranges home visits, prepares the household for any news, keeps the girls' routines as normal as possible.